Look at that. I'm muted there. Hey, what's up, everybody? Welcome back to Maxon Training Team. And this month, we have a new set of we are entering a new month, and we have a new series of demystifying post productions. And in this month, we will focus our attentions onto Universe. You probably know about Universe. Universe is a collection of plugins that can help you for everything, literally, from editing, motion graphics, graphic design, and even for color grading. And throughout this month, we'll be just talking about that. And in this first episode, Jason will walk you through some of his secret weapon in Universe, some of his favorite tools in Universe, and then also share some tips and tricks and also some workflow with you in using Universe to spice up your edits. And how are you, Jason?
Not too bad, thanks. How are you?
I'm really stoked. I'm really excited about this episode, Jason. I'm really ready to to learn from you today. But before we learn, Jason, let me share my screen and walk the audience a little bit. Do a little bit housekeeping.
Cool.
So everybody, if you are going to maxon.net/events, you can check all the events happening at Maxon at the moment. So you can see that at the moment we're live with Demystifying Post Productions for Universe for Editors Week 1. And then coming up next on Thursday, we have Chris Schmidt joining us in Ask the Trainer. And also after that on Friday, we'll have VFX and Chill with Hasi and Seth. And next Monday, another demystifying post productions will also take place, and I think on that series, Jason will talk about Avid Media Composer, and the next one will be color grading webinars, talk show about color grading with me. It will be in March 16th. So make sure you tune in to all of our webinar series. We got webinars for all of you. Anything you want, anything you want to know, we have it. It's from Monday until Friday. Right. Don't forget, if you're new to Maxon webinars, you can get free t-shirts. And to get the free t-shirts, you can follow the link. It's available in the PDF file, and the PDF file is listed in the video descriptions of the YouTube video descriptions. So you can download the PDF file and follow the link to the merch shop, and you can get one of this merchandise for free. You just need to enter the code when you are entering the shop. And the code, you can see it in your screen at the moment. It's Universe for Editors, right? And on top of that, Jason's also very kind, and he's providing a project files for our session today. So if you want to follow along, make sure that you go to the Dropbox links mentioned in the video descriptions and download the project files and follow along, right? And I think that's it from my side, Jason. We're good to go, and I think the floor is yours. Take it away, Jason.
Cool, thank you. One thing about those project files, I won't actually be getting into those for some time, and they're sort of more advanced, but I will show you what they are, and they're a sort of more advanced trick. So I was going to start with the basics. I'm sure many of you are familiar with Universe and especially Premiere, but I've found in the past it's not good to assume everybody knows everything, so I thought I'd sort of start from the beginning. So one of the first things we'll start with is where to actually find the Red Giant Universe effects. So I'm sure you're familiar with your panels. The effects panel is the first place to start. And normally most of them are in video effects. You can see down here, Universe Blur, Distort. They're sorted into different categories to make them easier to find. And because there's so many effects, around 90 of them, it saves you having to sort through a huge library of them. So you can sort of narrow them down based on categories, which you can see here. Likewise, if you know the effect you want, you can simply type it in. So if we wanted hacker text, I could just type in hacker, and you can see the list instantly shrinks down to where you can see hacker straight away. So that's the traditional way, the same way you'd find any other effect in Premiere. But the cool thing about Universe, which is one of my favorite things, is you have the red giant Universe dashboard. And this is a really nice visual way of finding the effect you want. If you don't have that by default, you can find that in Windows Extensions, Red Giant Universe, and as soon as you activate it, it becomes a panel that you can then dock wherever you like in your screen setup. You'll also notice, if we expand this back out, these categories that they're sorted into also matches here. So you can see blurs. We've got 4 types of blur, the same way we do down here. So this is a really nice way to find the effects. The other nice thing about the dashboard, which I quite like, is you also get an example of what each effect looks like. So for example, if we go to something like, I don't know, like Chroma Town, when you click on the effect, it takes you into the preset library for that particular effect. And then you can see basically every tool comes with a whole selection of presets. And if you hover over them, you can see what sort of effect that's going to have, which gives you an example. Obviously, it varies depending on what shot you're using, but this gives you a good starting point. As a rule, I tend to use this a lot, and if I've got an effect in mind, I will go through the different tools, find a tool that I think could work, and then use the presets to find something that's a good starting point. Because once you apply that, you can then tweak any of the controls to do whatever you want with it. So that's where to find the effects. As I say, I always use the dashboard, but you can also use them the traditional way. Or if you know what you want, quite often, like I was working on a project this morning where I needed box bokeh, so you just type in bokeh and instantly you can find it, and that's a quick way to apply it. So obviously there's a number of ways to apply effects. I'm sure this might be teaching you what you already know, but the Red Giant tools have both effects and transitions. To apply a transition, you can just drag it to the line between connecting 2 shots. And you'll see there that now has our transition from one shot to the next. Obviously, be aware that these shots aren't at the end of the shot. You can see by the little triangle icon at the start and end of these clips, that indicates the end of a clip. If you try to do a transition at the end or start of a particular shot, so for example, if I pull this out to the end of the clip, so now you can see that's the end. If I apply a transition to that point, it's forced to work backwards because there's no more shot on the outgoing shot, so it has to go backwards and you can't move it. I just undo to go back to how we were. The advantage of this is I can then move the transition from side to side. And like any other transition in Premiere, if I double click, I can instantly change the duration of the transition. So you can see we'll now make that 20 frames. And there we have a 20 frame clock wipe. So very easy to apply. Another thing you can do, if once you've got a setup you like, so say for example this clock wipe, we can go to the effects controls and you can start seeing a load of attributes that can be keyframed or changed. So obviously the start angle is where it starts. At the moment we're starting at the top. Just reselect that. We can change where that starts to any point, so we could have it start at 3 o'clock if you wanted to. We can soften it. So you can see now it's like a nice soft wipe. If you like something like that, something you're going to use quite often, we can save that as a preset, which we do over here. I'll go into that in more detail, so I'm just going to look at how we apply the effects for the moment. But we can save presets of anything. Another thing we can do is you can actually select the effect and hit Command or Control C to copy it. And then we can come to another one, select the line between this, and then hit Control V or Command V, and you can paste exactly that same effect. So it's a nice way to apply a particular effect if you've got a stock effect that you like to use the same all the time or throughout a production. There is another thing to watch with effects in Premiere in particular. It varies depending on edit application. If I were to move the second shot up and overlap it like this, if I were then to apply an effect onto the top shot, certain things work quite well. So for example, if I apply the VHS effect, the VHS transition rather, you'll notice as we step through, it sort of disturbs the first picture without actually moving it and sort of transition through to the second one. But the effect, although it's affecting the picture, it's not actually transforming the picture at all. So only half the effect's working. This is something to be aware of, because if we were to get rid of that and use something like warp doesn't really work at all because it doesn't affect the bottom layer, it only affects the top layer, so you end up with a sort of cut to the new picture, which then warps in. So that's something useful to know. You may want that effect. If that's something you want, then that's a useful thing. If not, then obviously it's not so useful. So that sort of brings the question of if you want to do something more complicated, like if you've got 2 layers, you can use nesting. So for example, if we wanted to add this text over the top, which you can see is simple white text, but I've used the universe luster effect to give it that sort of beveled, glassy 3D look. Now to apply a transition there, because the 2 shots won't transition properly, because if I add the transition onto the text layer, it won't affect the bottom layer and it has to start at the start of the clip. So the trick here is to nest the 2 shots. So if you get the shots, right click and choose nest. It's good to keep housekeeping, so I'll call it text demo. Always name your sequence, because otherwise you end up with a load of nests, which if we come back in here, you can see it adds them to the root of the project, which normally I would have a folder for nests and drag them in to keep them neat. But now we can add an effect. The only other problem is you can see that the nest clip is now starting at the beginning. So when we apply a transition to that, so say for example the warp, it has to start at that point because there's no shot for it to go backwards. But now you've got a nice transition from your outgoing shot through to the composite of the incoming shot with the text over the top. So that's a useful trick if you're applying a transition to multiple layered effects. So the next thing we'll look at is obviously the normal effect. So that's a transition. There's a huge amount of other effects, which we'll have a look at some of them in more detail soon, but the video effects, there's a number of ways you can apply these. You can select the clip and double click, and you'll see here it's instantly added it to the effect controls of that clip. If we come onto here and wind it up so you can see it taking effect, you can see now that's instantly applied. If I delete that, you can also drag it from the effects onto here, straight onto the clip like that. You can see that's had an effect. You can also drag it from the effects into the effects control. So there's a number of ways to do it. There isn't really a right and wrong. You can do whichever way works best for you. You can also apply them directly from the dashboard, which is a useful way to do it. So for example, if we were going to apply a chroma town, you can see I could just apply the effect. Obviously, this will apply onto the clip that's selected in the timeline. And then likewise, you can step into that and you can apply one of the presets, and you can see it's applied the preset to it. So if we come through to here, it's just having a bit of a think, but there we go. So you can see it's now applied. It took a second for some reason. My computer was having a little bit of an issue. So there's a number of ways to apply effects. Another trick I use quite often, so this is applying an effect straight onto the clip. There's 2 other ways that are really useful. One is an adjustment layer. You can create an adjustment layer down here, the adjustment layer. And for those who don't know, an adjustment layer is like an invisible layer that can be used to apply something to multiple clips at the same time. And that's where this is useful, especially if you're using one of the effects, like for example, if we wanted to go with a film look. Let's go to the dashboard to make it easier. So we're in the stylized tools. So if we go with carousel, which is a film style look, activate that, the adjustment layer, and then apply the effect. This will now apply the effect onto everything under that adjustment layer. So you can see it's a nice way to affect multiple shots at once. So that's quite a useful idea. There's also another trick you can use is you can use a black layer if you're using text, as long as the text isn't black. So for example, if I add this black layer up here and then use one of the text creation tools, so let's say go with hacker text. Actually, let's do something like screen text. It says my computer's not very happy about jumping in and out of this mode. And now we have the spinning beach ball. Brilliant. Here we go. So now you can see the text. Because the text is applied on top of the black layer, by default, some of the tools use screen mode, but if it didn't, every universe tool has a blend mode built in. So it means you could actually play with it that way and control different methods of compositing it onto your image underneath. Obviously, the way it works varies depending on tool. And this particular example isn't working spectacularly, but it's a nice way to be able to add different text onto another layer, which you can then sort of paste and drag over multiple layers. But I tend to use the adjustment layer more often than the black layer. It's just easier to use. So now the next thing is keyframing. Every universe effect is keyframable and a range of attributes. So for example, if we go back to, let's go with Chroma Town again. So once you have Chroma Town applied, if we go through to effects controls, you can see every function here with a little stopwatch next to it can be animated. So you can keyframe things like we could change the colorfulness, move forward a little bit, wind that down to 0, which in this case hasn't done a huge amount. We can change the position. So for example, the way Chroma Town works is you have a start image and an end image. So you can see the sort of blur pulling it through is based on the end image is smaller. So I can create more of an effect by making that even further to create like a tunnel. So that could be a good example of a nice animation. Maybe you want to start the effect on 100%, add a keyframe, go forward in time, and then say go to 50%. And there you have a nice effect where the effect sort of pulls in, which in fact you can see is sort of part of a warp transition, which you could do that and then do another shot doing the opposite keyframing and mix between the two for a similar warp style effect. So as I say, keyframing, it depends on what effect you're using, but there's hundreds of attributes. Some of them are crazy, like if you look at something like holographic, holomatrix, that has a huge amount of controls. As you sort of expand these out, there's all kinds of different controls that you can play with, and keyframe all the different things that in effects you have quite a long list of each attributes of glitches, scanlines, all of these different bits you can turn on and off and keyframe and change the settings. So you can see it's infinitely animatable. And quite often I use things like, for example, I use things how they're not necessarily designed, and that's one of the things I try to never use a preset. I always start with a preset and then change it. So for example, quite often I'll use holomatrix and turn everything off except for scanlines. As you see here, if we come down, and it's just a really nice quick way to get scanlines. So it's sort of loads of different tools built into one, and you can sort of build up on that and just add a bit of glow if you want that sort of old analog TV scanline look. So now the next thing is once you've built an effect you like. So obviously, if we look at, that's a good example. So I've built scanlines. We can do things, you can copy that effect, and there's a number of ways you can copy effects within Premiere. One is you can, within this effects controls, you can select it and then Command C or Control C, or use the edit, copy and paste functions. So if we copy it, then we can come to another shot and we can paste it straight in here. And there you'll see that's got the same effect. Or likewise, you could actually paste it on the clip. You can right click and choose paste attributes. Actually, if we just do, in that case, because we've got just the effect, I can hit Command C and then select the clip and paste it. So that's a good way to paste it onto multiple clips, which you see there. But if, for example, if you had a chain of effects, like in here, there might be a few things, I can copy the actual clip, which copies everything about the clip. And then I can paste on a new clip, and you can choose paste attributes. And you can see here, you get a list of all the different attributes. So in this case, we just want the holomatrix effect. We can hit OK, and it just applies that, as you can see up here. So copying and pasting is quite useful for moving an effect around a timeline. But you can also share effects with people and save them for use in other projects and later on. So there's a number of ways to do that. We can save them in Premiere. So that effect there, we could just simply right click and do save preset and call it Jason's holomatrix. And then any Premiere saved effects, if you come to the top of the list here, presets, Jason's holomatrix. So then we can apply it like any other effect. So we can grab a shot and drag it on. And you see that's got the same attributes. The other way this tool is quite cool is you can do multiple effects. So for example, if we wanted to add something more onto this, so let's say, for example, if we go to a motion graphic and add a HUD component on top, so you can see it gives us this disk. I won't bother doing anything tricky with it. What I will do is I'll just go down into the settings and change the blend mode and make it something like screen. So there you can see we've got something. Let's make it a little bit bigger. So now say, for example, this sort of zoom effect and the HUD, what I can do is come into these tools in the effect control, select both of the tools and save preset. And then we can call that whatever you want. Obviously, naming things sensibly is useful if you need to find them later. And you can see now we've got that holometric HUD is actually the two effects in one. So if we go to this shot, which is a clean shot, see I can drag that straight on and instantly it applies both effects. So there's actually ways you can build sort of complex layered effects and copy and paste them in Premiere. There's also a cool thing where if you've got something, so say, for example, that HUD we like, if we'd spent a lot of time and built a complex setting, we can use the Red Giant system to save presets. And this is quite nice because we can just save the preset here, give it a name, and hit OK. And that saves it into the Red Giant library. So similar to when we were in the dashboard where you could see the different presets, we can click on here and you'll see the presets, and the custom one's always at the bottom. So there you can see Jason's HUD and it gives you an image to show you what it does. Similarly, you can hit choose a preset and that will pop you through to here as well. But the nice thing about this is that will save a preset that's called an RGX file. I'll just open in my documents, Red Giant, Universe, Presets. You'll see down here somewhere. So there's Jason's HUD. So that's the file that we've just created. The nice thing about that is if you work for different places or on different computers, as a freelance editor, I'm constantly going from company to company using their system. I can carry a load of these files on a little USB stick and plug it into any computer and copy them in so I can take my presets with me. Likewise, if you work at a facility with multiple computers, you could share these files onto other computers and you can all share these Universe presets that you've built. So it's a really handy way of saving them. Interestingly, these effects are also, the same effects files are used on the different hosts. So for example, if I were to open After Effects, you'd now see that preset in After Effects. Likewise in DaVinci Resolve or Avid Media Composer, they're all shared. It's the same effect type. So when you build an effect in one host, it's available in all the others automatically, which is really good on the same computer. So anything that you see in the presets library in the dashboard, so anything down here is now available in all the hosts. So that's quite a useful thing. So I thought I'd show you a few of my favorite effects. I think for me, one of the most powerful things in the Red Giant library is things like Lion is quite useful, and there's a number of tools that I play with a lot. But for me, one of the most powerful things, the text tools, because notoriously in edit systems, creating animated text is always quite complicated. And so, for example, I built a few little bits here. So like this is an example of two different text layers, which I've used adjustment layers. So the first one I've added is actually the screen text tool, which is basically this. If we go to the presets, this gives you a whole lot of sort of computer readout, random gibbery text. And I quite like this can be used as an element to sort of make something look digital. As you can see there, this sort of text writing out. But what's really cool here is you'll see this text is specific. I've actually taken it from the Red Giant website explaining what all the Universe tools do. So when you come into it, if you click on the edit text, you can see you can actually copy and paste a load of different text. So it's quite nice that your text can be very specific and you've got full font control. So it's quite a nice way of animating sort of text. You can see in this case we have a little red cursor. You can control what the cursor does, what color it is, and all those sort of things. And it's a quite a nice way to add sort of a level of detail to a shot, especially if it's something, I don't know, data related or technological. That can be a nice element. You can sort of blur it and blend it in. And then another tool I've used here is called the Typon, which is the classic typewriter type effect. But again, there's a load of different sort of options, and you can see as you hold in the dashboard what each one's doing. And you can control whether it has a cursor, whether it goes backwards or forwards, color. And as usual, these are just presets. Once you've got it loaded, you can do all kinds of things. There's loads of different configurable attributes. And you can see in this case, I've made it so almost like a little identifier graphic, a locator graphic at the top. And I've chosen sort of a random type. So you can see it just types on this text quite nicely. So that's sort of a simple idea of using two of the universe tools to sort of enhance a shot and maybe use it as an introduction to a section. A very quick way to do something that would otherwise be quite difficult. Just turn off that overlay because we don't really need to see those timecode numbers. So it's a bit cleaner. So that's an example where I've put the text on a black video layer, and you'll see down here, I haven't had to use blend mode because the text tool automatically keys onto the pictures correctly. And then the type tool is on an adjustment layer, but it doesn't really matter. I could have applied both of those onto the basic shot if I wanted to. It just depends how you want to work. Adjustment layers are useful if you need to spread the effect over a number of shots. Another tool I particularly like is the hacker text. Go back here. Hacker text, the main thing I like about it is it's sort of basically, the thing I like most is it's got a load of different options. You can use it as a type-on tool, and you can use it where it uses random characters to type on, and there's a load of nice presets in there. But I quite like it as a way of, I work on a lot of international programming that's filmed all over the world and sort of normally sports documentary style. And this is a classic example, which I've used a number of times now in productions, where you can see here, for example, we've got a picture of St. Petersburg, and we can have the text come on, which you can see subtly has Scanlines through it, which you can also add within the effect. So down in here, there's some controls. Let me see where it is, down in effects here. So you can see I've turned on Scanlines, and you've got control over how much. And I've also keyframed a mix on and mix off with the foreground opacity just to make it come on. And the nice thing is it sits on the graphic for a few seconds, and then it sort of goes through some random text and turns it into English, which is quite nice to get a flavor of the countries you're working on. Like this is an example I've just built for this session, but recently I did a short documentary for the Premier League, and it was about a German player. So every location we started always was spelt out in the correct German spelling, and then we had it transition through to English. And that way, being in the English Premier League, it makes sense to have English text, but it's nice to sort of keep that international flavor to things. Another tool I particularly like is this chroma displacement, which I've actually turned off. So I've put it on quite seriously. It's almost like you're looking at a reflection in a puddle of water. But where you could start getting wacky with transitions, like with some of the effects, and this is something I use quite often as well, is I'll use the mask on the effect. So I'm sure you're all aware that within, you can obviously control the opacity of every layer, and it has its own blend mode and its own masking capability with these three, but every effect also has the same. So we can do things like we can add a transition in the middle, transition and mask, sorry, which by default goes in the middle, and sort of pull it out a little bit. And then what we can do is invert it and feather it quite severely. And if you want, you can expand it quite quickly using that tool. And then you get, I'll just deselect the clip so we don't have that blue indicator. And there you have a guy sort of walking down a tunnel of sort of watery, ripply side images, which kind of works really well because he's looking from side to side. So it's almost like he's walking through some liquidy jungle. So always play around with masking, because that's another trick to sort of make effects do a lot more than they were originally intended to do. Another tool I particularly like is called Modes. Modes is basically a blend mode tool, and the story behind it is Avid doesn't come with a modes tool, a blend tool. So Modes was created for that purpose. The only thing is this modes tool is like a blend mode on steroids, because the traditional blend modes, you've got this list of different blend modes, which I'm sure you're all familiar with, like screen. You can see it just applies a screen blend. But when you use modes, it doesn't initially do anything because you have to choose what type and how much you're going to mix between and choose the background layer in Premiere. So this is one thing to be aware of. Is by default it hasn't done anything because we've applied it to layer 2 and it's asking what the background layer is. So in this case, we want it to apply to video 1. And there you can see this is using RGB color space, which if you understand color, you can vary your color space to work out the mathematics of what it's going to do. Here we've got our range of standard blend modes that you're used to. But where this gets a bit strange and wacky and you can come up with hundreds of different things is if we use an add blend mode, we can also use an overlay blend mode, which to show you the difference. So that's overlay and that's add. But you can see here we've got nice control where we can sort of get a nice mix between the two. So that's a bit too dark. So normally if you'd apply an overlay, it looks like that. If you apply add, it looks like that. And we can sort of play now and get a nice sort of balance, something like that, which looks really cool. So it gives you a lot of power to control how two images are blending together. But you can also start getting crazy with the controls. You've got all the different color channels you can play with. So you can make the green color channel use a different sort of blend mode to other color channels. And if we have a look at the presets, you'll start to get an idea of there's some pretty wild and wacky types in here, which is just a case of having a play with them. But it's quite a nice experimental tool where you can play around with it and come up with different options. I'll just jump to another favorite of mine, which I wasn't going to look at this, but this is the line tool is something I particularly like. And you see, like in this example with football, I've used the line to create an arrow to track the football. And similarly, we can do the same with the basketball. So this is just in the motion graphics and it's called line. And it's basically just an animated line from one point to another. So they're just sort of examples of ways of playing with, because you can play with the angle of the line. You can play with whether it's dotted or solid. You can play with different points on it. So for example, you can see this one here starts off blue and ends up white, but it keeps a blue arrow and the colors have been color picked off the Manchester City kit. And then obviously it's tracked with the image, which I've done manually. But also you can use this tool for, it doesn't like this. It looks like it's not going to play, but I was going to say a traditional map of just going from one place to another on a map. And it looks like I may have just killed Premiere. So the line tool is quite a useful one. So they're sort of some of my favorite tools. We can come and have a look after and maybe see if there's any questions. I might just show you the files I've included is a way of taking things to another level. It looks like my Premiere isn't very happy. But maybe we'll avoid that for the moment. So the files that we've included is a Mogrt, a couple of different tools. One is this exact After Effects project to create Mogrts. I don't know how many of you are familiar with the creation of Mogrts. Mogrts are basically a graphic file where you can build something in After Effects. So it allows you to use tools that aren't readily available in Premiere and bring them into Premiere quite easily. It was quite annoying, so I was hoping to show you them. Let me just get Premiere to restart. The joys of computing. Won't bother them with a complaint at the moment, but so the idea behind the Mogrts is you can build something. So for example, if there's a graphic you're going to use quite regularly. Sorry, just open Premiere again. Yeah, so if there's a graphic you're going to use quite regularly and you don't want to have to go and rebuild it all the time, you can build something that can be reused easily from Premiere. And there's two examples here in After Effects I've built. One was actually used on the Premier League many years ago, and I've changed it slightly so that I can give the file out. And another one is something that was used on the recent European Championship competition. So this first one, the idea is it's a field of particles. Now this one needs to be built in After Effects because the particle system doesn't work in Premiere. Sorry, bear with me. We're back. I'll just set my workspace so you can see all the windows again. That's better. So these are the Mogrts when they load. It'll take a second. So I can show you in here. So the idea of this one is it's a field of moving, flexing particles. And the idea with these particles is the logo pushes out. Here we go. Jumping backwards and forwards, sorry. So this is the Mogrt file that I built. So it's sort of a rippling pattern of particles of color with a bit of an electrical discharge over it. And then you can see text pushes through. And basically, there's 3 clips which are the same camera move. So these Mogrts have been provided in the download. Now, the point of using a Mogrt is this is all using a particle system, a trapcode form particle system, which is one of the trapcode tools. So if you have Red Giant Complete, you have access to all these tools. For this to work, you will need Red Giant Complete because you'll need, so it won't work if you only have Universe. But just to show you, if I come through to the Essential Graphics panel, the idea here is I can port certain controls through to Premiere. So we use this on major sports tournaments quite often because we hire editors who may be really good at Premiere but may not know After Effects very well. So this is a way that I can control. So this is actually being generated in the After Effects engine, but I can update this. And it may take a second. Well, actually, it doesn't take that long at all. So you can see, let's get rid of that overlay again. It's interesting, I can't turn it off. Okay. So you can see there I can change the colors, and in this particular case, I've set this scale so I can scale the text down. I'll just undo that, and then I can move the text position. I tend to always build that in because if you needed to do something more complicated, so for example, if I put my surname as well, once it updates, you'll see it's now off the screen. So by allowing yourself controls like this is quite useful because then you can make sure everything fits and you can move it around the screen a little bit. And then in this case, I've also added color controls. So we've got the 3 colors for the background, and then I've got the electrify colors. So for example, I can quickly change the colors of the electric. So now that electric's sort of a pinky purple color. But you can see it doesn't match the background, so we can also change the background. So you can see the power of these, how quickly you can sort of, so now I've created a totally different looking graphic within Premiere without having to know how After Effects works. So you can see the power of that. It's got the red bar. It is admittedly quite slow to play back, and it depends, because this is using thousands of particles, you actually need a fairly decent computer to be able to move it at this speed. But still, it's a very clever system. Another example, so there's 3 different camera angles. For those who haven't used it before, when you use the Mogrts, you just hit the plus button and you navigate to where your Mogrt files are, and they look like this will be the files you will have downloaded, and they just end in .mogrt. They'll import into your Mogrt library, and you can see in Essential Graphics you have Browse and then Edit. And the first time you use them, you have to physically drag them from here down into your timeline, and that will put them into your project in this folder, Motion Graphics Templates. Once they're in, you can copy them. So for example, you could make multiple copies of that by holding down Option or Alt and drag it, and there you have another copy. So we can simply change that one to be Universe. You can see how quickly that is to update, and it's quite a cool looking graphic to do in Premiere. So another tool I've used, this is something more complicated. This one you don't have, but I've given you a variation on this. This was an actual graphic designed for the European Championship football tournament held all over Europe. And the idea is this is 2 teams when they're coming head to head so that we can preview the teams and talk about their sort of success against each other. So you can see in this Mogrt, I've built a drop down so you can choose the home team. So I'm in England, for example, and away team Max is in Germany. We can say, you can wind up any number you want. You can see interactively as we're controlling how many they've won and lost, you can see the graphs automatically updating and the colors all work out, and we can put more draws in. But the nice thing is, no matter what the numbers are, that will all animate and build correctly. So that's quite a useful tool that I've been using quite a lot. And incidentally, that's actually made using the Progresso tool, which you can see here, which is a graph generator, which is a really cool way to make graphs and things quickly. If we click on that, you can see there's a whole load of graph functions, which I actually love this tool because you can use it for things like a light display. You could animate that and make it look like something going to the beat of music. And there's a huge amount you can do with that. And the fact that it all works in Premiere to make graphs is brilliant. This one was built in After Effects just so we had more control over the animation. Plus in this graph, we've used a lot of scripting to make the different functionality work, but I can show you that in a second. So what you do have is this version, which is essentially the same graphic, but I've rebuilt it slightly. So you've still got the Progresso functionality. You've got different flags, which are copyright free, so they're able to be used for training and playing around. You won't have this font, but you'll have the text in place. And you can see with the text layer, there is one thing, there's 2 layers of these. And the reason for this is you can see here when you're on the clean layer, we have controls over which country and all the different numbers, all the different number values. There's some strange things like this home correction, draw correction, and away correction. Because of the maths used to make the pie chart generate itself, there's certain possibilities. And in fact, as it happens, I've just fallen on one now. You can see here, draws have got 97%, and each team's win is 2%, and that actually adds up to 101%, which is no good. So I've built in this simple correction where you can just cheat the number down. So you can see now that's popped to 96. So it's basically cheating because obviously standard maths, everything's rounded up too much. So I've had to build that in so we can correct things like that. But this also uses the array gun tool, which is another really cool tool here. You can see there's a variation and there's a whole load of different functions and presets that you can choose from, massive amount. So I've used one of those to generate a background. So you have this Mogrt that you can play with. And just into After Effects, you can see what's going on in the background. So basically, these are the project files, which you've also got this After Effects project. So I use lots of different scripting tricks. So one is I build a library of all the flags of all the teams involved in the competition, and then a control layer that basically brings in the text. And then every flag has a little expression which just basically controls the opacity. So that when you use the drop down, so if we go to the flag here, so when you use this drop down, it basically changes the number. It feeds into this control, which then changes the number, so only ever one of these is visible, which is how we change the flag. And in fact, you can see here, if we go to Croatia, instantly it's changing. And it's just controlling which of these layers is visible. So it's actually a really simple trick. Oh, the one thing I did fail to show you is the reason there's 2 layers is because when we work on an international tournament like the Euros, we work in English, but obviously not like the German audience don't want to see it in English. So I separate it as layers. So you can see the bottom layer, which we call clean, is all of the graph elements, all the numbers, everything that's suitable for all languages. And then we do the English as a separate layer, which is just the English text. And the idea is when we deliver that to broadcasters, we deliver what we call the dirty version, which an English-speaking broadcaster can put to air straight away. And we can present the clean version, so a German broadcaster or any other nationality can simply add their own text, and then they've got a ready-made piece they can use. So that's the reason for 2 layers. A quick thing for anyone who hasn't played with Mogrts, basically any project you make. So for example, if we look at this form, so this is using a number of things. We've got trapcode form making the particles. We using trapcode shine to create these light rays. And then we've got universe electrify to create this electric sort of energy around things. The electrify is really cool. It just sort of, this is just working on luminance levels in the picture, but you can just see it sort of makes it look alive. And the idea with motion graphics templates is if you use the Essential Graphics tab, which you can find up here, Essential Graphics, basically when you load up a sequence, so if we were going to play with the right ones, if we get this one, which is text CU flyby A, double click that to make sure you've got the right one. Basically the attributes you can pull through, if we hit show solo supported properties, every single property here which you can see there's thousands of, can be brought into this control area. And then when you save it, this is what carries through to Premiere. So basically, this is allowing control in Premiere. So for example, the text layer, if you find a text layer, which is a bit more complicated because it's in a nested scene, but it's just as simple as, so there's the text. All I've done is drag that up here, which it won't work because you can see it's going to tell me it's already there because the top one is it. And then this allows control. You can activate or lock off. So for example, we can enable font selection. So on the events I work on, we always leave that locked because we don't want editors changing the font because it will be the font from the event. I've changed it to impact here to make sure that you all have that font. But so basically you pull in all the commands, the controls you want to provide, and then it's just simply a case of export motion graphics template, and that will save the file and build the Mogrt file, which you can then bring into Premiere. So a very useful way of more complicated, or not even complicated in a sense, like something like this, although a lot of, well, this is using a lot of scripting and mathematics, which you'll see if we come back in here. If I grab everything, look at all the expressions, you can see that there's quite a lot of expressions in there. In fact, quite a large amount of expressions controlling everything. And this is actually 3 layers of Progresso. So if we look at the Progresso, come to effects controls, you can actually see, I've called them slice, but there's 3 different layers. There's one that I was playing with to add the text using Progresso, but I've had to use different method to make them sort of spin around and control them more accurately. But you can see there's 3 different layers within the one tool. So if we turn off a layer, for example, you'll notice we're missing a chunk. And then each one of those has got various expressions to make them work. But even if you wanted to build Mogrts with more simple tools, well, these are all quite complex examples, but it's a nice way to lock things because you can give editors control of colors, control of text details, and it basically gives people control of whatever you want. So it means you can't accidentally use the wrong font or the wrong color. So I've given color control because I thought it'd be fun, but you could simply lock those as well. So you can see it's quite fun just sort of playing it. Once you've built something you like, just playing around to come up with different color combinations and make everything green. So you can see how quick and easy it is to update within Premiere. So I don't know, I haven't been watching the questions, but I don't know if Max has any questions that anyone has that I can answer.
Seems all good, Jason, in the questions. People are really liking it, and a lot of a good praise for you.
Cool. Well, one other thing that I can go through is one of the things with a lot of the effects, where I was saying before, I tend to use things in wacky ways. I think for me, one of the things is while the presets are really cool, as a professional editor and graphic designer, I don't want anyone to ever see something and say, "Oh, I recognize that." So I always change something. And one of the cool things about these generators is, well, if you come into the first page, fractal background, they all look like they create interesting backgrounds. I actually got to play a part in building some of the presets, and one of the first things I do is tend to see if I can make things do things they're not supposed to. And I think turbulent noise is a classic example. Like turbulent noise, for anyone building graphics, is just a sort of computer-generated cloud-looking material. Let's go back to this one, so we've got a picture to work with. There we go. So if we apply that onto there, it's basically just a black and white cloud pattern. You'll notice when I apply it, even though here it's giving us animation, when we apply something in Premiere, nothing happens initially. So if we come into the effects control, there's normally a number of ways, quite often animation, speed, and cycle. You'll see in this case, evolution and cycles isn't doing anything. So the easiest way is come back to the beginning. Let's put a keyframe on evolution and just wind that up to wherever. And there you can see it's quite subtly doing things. And this is quite nice because you can sort of play, you can jump back to that keyframe and say, okay, 141, that's working in degrees. So that's not a huge amount. So if we go to 360, and you can see, let's go even more. And there you can see it's going to spin through quite drastically. But again, that's just sort of the cloud pattern. When I started playing with it recently, I started to find you could do all kinds of wacky things. So if we go to the presets, you can see the traditional presets are sort of blobby looking patterns. And if we apply them, you'll see them all blocky, flat, different sort of scan line ideas, animated rain. But I quite like playing with the way they composite over images. And one of the best things to remember about all universe effects is they all come with this blend mode built in. So as soon as you start playing with blend modes, you get all kinds of wacky results happening. So there's like some kind of sort of evil rain that almost looks like that Lost City. I can't remember the name of it. There's some film that had that sort of animated look about it. But the more I played with them, I started finding you could do things like have blocks over the top, and it's just sort of a way of bringing in an interesting dimension. And then you can sort of stretch them out and play diagonally. So it's just quite nice ways to treat pictures. And then obviously you can play further. So even though we start with one of these, so if we start with that, that's a bit too dark. You can come in and you can play, so you can see that's using an overlay, but we can actually wind down the opacity. So if you think about different ways to use the tools, you can get some really cool effects. And for example, one of the main things I use is this shot here, for example. So that's just a standard fractal background. It's just sort of blobs of light moving around. But by simply applying that to an image and changing the blend mode to, say, screen, suddenly you have a sort of light leak looking image. That's quite a nice way of making natural light leaks. Now, the nice thing about that as well is because this is generated by the computer, you can change the numbers, but it also loops. So it's a perfect light leak that if you had a 30-second, if you were making something that you needed it to loop, you can dial in a loopable amount here. So now every 45 seconds, it will start back exactly where it left off, which is really cool if you're making looping backgrounds and things like that. Just trying to think if there's any other particular examples. I think in the sport world, we use a lot of the stylize. The VHS effect is very popular. Once this updates, it just makes things look like old VHS style, which I think a lot of the younger generation will not even be aware of what VHS was like, but this used to be sort of the video format we watched at home. Or another tool, which is one of the more recent tools, Sketchify, I find really cool. And you can see this is just built using a preset, so it sort of looks like a lead pencil drawing. If we choose the preset, there's a load of presets again that you can start with, but then you can play. So for example, chalk etching, which is almost like a negative of that lead pencil. But things like cartoon, sort of quite subtle, and you can see it's got almost like a sort of wet paint look to it. But then again, there's all these different controls. So you can start winding up ink intensity, and you can sort of put a little bit of the edges back, so it sort of looks a little bit sharper and a bit of detail in it. So yeah, I guess in conclusion, the way I tend to work is if you're getting used to the universe tools, play around in the dashboard and get used to, obviously, universe that you see everything, so you can scroll down. You could go through every tool and spend hours doing so. Actually, this is another one for anyone doing social media stuff that is really cool. The typographic effect. If we have a look at this, it's basically a really simple tool that has two objects or two shapes and two elements of text. So for example, if we just apply one like this, hopefully I don't break my computer again. There we go. Now I've noticed in Premiere it doesn't show you text straight away, but if we close Sketchify, when you go into the edit text, once you text something properly, it normally should appear. There you go. So I don't know why for some reason it doesn't come up straight away. But the nice thing here is you'll see the animation, everything's built in. I might just get rid of Sketchify to speed things up. So basically you can see here there's text 1, text 2, shape 1, shape 2, and background. And that's basically all there is to it. But it animates every element on quite nicely. And you can see here's a blob with a box and then 2 layers of text. So for example, you can see the shape. We have a shape library, which has a load of effects, like a load of shapes rather. We expand this. You can see here blobs. You can see there's a lot of different shapes. you can also click on here to see different shapes. So we could do like a bell. So now you see we've got a blobby bell in the background. And then you can play with the colors of each element and then control the animation. So again, this is sort of infinitely controllable. But the amazing thing is if we go to choose a preset, you can see here just how many different styles there are already to get you started. So if you want name supers for YouTube videos or little side elements, like you can see here, little title cards, little thought bubbles of someone speaking. The cool thing is this is a really quick way to do all kinds of graphics. Apply them quickly. And then don't forget, once you've built something you like, so say if we apply that one, again, the text will be missing. So if we just go into edit text and update the text, and then you've got that second layer. There we go. Obviously, we can change fonts as well. If we come down and we choose, let's make shape 1. We want to go pink with yellow text. Lovely. That'll do for the purpose of this. We can, once you sort of set up all the parameters, obviously you can see you can play in there for hours, get the fonts and everything right. Don't forget the powerful thing of saving a preset. Like so, and that's now saved and available for anyone to use. If we choose a preset, you can come down the bottom and you'll see there it is. Doesn't give us a preview, unfortunately, but at least you know what it is, you know where it is. And then, as I said before, in the documents part of your computer, in Red Giant Universe presets, you'll see there it is, Jason's Typographic. So I could now put that on a key and take that with me when I go on a job somewhere else, or I could put it on another computer, use it in Avid, however you want. So it's an incredibly powerful way of moving things around and building sort of really cool graphics. Of course, this example here is on a background. The one I didn't show you is you can quite quickly change to the background. We've got colors. We can simply turn off the background and now it's the graphic over our shot. So you can see how useful they are. So that sort of gives you a brief look. I would say the best thing to do is to sort of play around in the dashboard and get used to what tools are possible, because there's like an infinite amount of possibilities. And once you start playing with the different settings, you can come up with a mind-blowing amount of different graphic looks and text styles and ways to make editing much faster.
Yeah, Jason, thank you so much for sharing that with us. I particularly love the way you use blend mode to create the lens flare, because those are the categories of effects that I found like I use like very less. I should explore more in that category, the generator categories in Universe.
Yes, yeah, definitely.
So I also would like to point out to the audience is that, you know, when you want to like learn more about Universe, and if you don't want to open the tool, open the dashboard, you can also go to the website, maxon.net, and go to Universe, Products, Universe, and you can select like the category of the tools. And as soon as you hover over your cursor, you can really see like, for example, the chromaton creating some sort of like that effects, the box bokeh, holomatrix, electrify, and so on and so forth. That's also another nice way to kind of like have a fast overview of what the tools are doing. Well, so Jason, thank you so much once again for showing us and sharing your knowledge with us. I'd like to point out to the audience in the sessions that this sessions is being recorded and it will be available later for viewing under Maxon Training Team in YouTube. So if you want to like play around with the project files that Jason provided, you can go to the recording. It will be under the playlist and search for Demystifying Post Productions you'll be able to find this video later on, and you can rewatch it and try to create your own scene with the project files that Jason kindly provided to you. And if you also want to check another like episodes of all the webinars that we have, literally, those webinars are timestamped. So if you don't have much time to spend for an hour webinars, you can kind of like browse the webinars descriptions, and you can really see the timestamps that, you know, talk about the exact topic that you're looking for. And thank you so much, Dr. Sasi, for providing timestamps to all our webinars. You're great. And also, check out the upcoming events, check out the upcoming webinars available in maxon.net/events. And also, don't forget to get your t-shirt. The link is in the PDF file that is provided in the project file. So if you go to the downloadable, you'll be able to open the PDF file, and you can follow the link to our shop, and you can get one of this merchandise using the code that you will see on your screen, Universe for Editors. And yeah, that's it from us. That's it for today. And thank you very much, Jason. And I hope to see you all in next week, Monday, where we'll be joined by Jason again, and he will break down all the cool stuff inside Avid Media Composer. Right, Jason?
Yeah, that's right.
All righty. I really cannot wait for that. And I wish you all a really nice day and happy learning, and see you again next week. Thank you. Bye-bye.
All right. Thanks, everyone.